Should we get into it?
Yes.
I guess we're going to get into it.
All right. Good luck, everybody. Break your leg.
Here we go.
Okay. Welcome to the Dialectic People's Podcast, brothers and sisters. I am still Kuku Agami. Nothing's changed. And I'm sitting here in the studio with Brandon. How you doing?
I'm all right, Kuku. It's good to be back.
Definitely. Most definitely. And of course, Klai. How you doing?
I'm good. It's nice to be back. It's been a while.
It's been a while, man.
It's been way too long.
Yeah.
Way too long.
Yeah, it's been too long. Definitely.
We missed it.
Yeah. And I hope everybody missed us.
We hope so. We hope so.
I really do. But we're back, and we plan to be coming back to you on a
regular basis.
Thank you very much. I was lost for words there for a second. And this is the first in many, I hope, to come your way. And of course, as usual, in this break, we haven't been sitting idly along. We have been plotting and scheming, and we might have some new stuff for you too. So remember to check in, and we'll let you know when it pops. But today we'd like to talk about something, and I have a piece of paper right in front of me, and it says how to talk to relatives you disagree with. It could be colleagues to friends,
family, obviously.
Yeah, relatives.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, family.
Sure.
But it could be anybody that you're close to.
Yeah.
See on a regular basis, or maybe not so regular basis, that you have a fundamental disagreement with.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be on any number of topics, but we think there are some specific topics that people have in mind when they're concerned about how to deal with somebody they're close to, and they have this like really strong disagreement with.
Yeah.
So we're not just talking interpersonal problems.
Not
talking about like big issues, societal issues, and issues that I guess not being able to talk about them is detrimental to your relationship to this individual. Right.
Can be breaking up a relationship, can be tearing a family apart, can make it really hard to get up in the morning and go to work because you're having problems conversating or bringing up dialogue with this person. And before we get into scenarios and stuff like that, we'd like to talk about why do we need to be able to do this? Why do we need to be able to figure this out? And maybe after that, talk about
can't we just all get along?
Can we just all get along?
Oh, Rodney.
Ooh. Ooh.
Yeah, we'd like to all get along.
Yeah, that's the point, you know.
Some people believe some craziness,
some crazy shit,
and we just can't live with it.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
Yeah, but that's why I think we need to start off by getting into some of these, these fundamental reasons for even addressing this topic.
Yeah. What are the underlying issues that maybe have led to us? And it's not just something that we feel, it's something that we can, you can see, that you hear people talking about constantly. It's like, this has become an issue. This is a problem, So what are the underlying issues that have made this a problem today that it maybe wasn't yesterday?
Mm-hmm.
So let's get into it, man.
First of all, just as an individual having this issue with a close friend, colleague, family, it might have been going on for very long and you just kept quiet, but it builds up and just sits there, I think, as tension, like constantly you're in that situation with this person and things come up, or you're anxious and worried, and it could even be something like your mother and father, which you can't. Well, you could, cut the cord, but I mean,
who really wants to do that?
Yeah, who wants to do that? And might not even be that you're having, it could be a person that you really, really like, and you maybe you basically have fun with this person, but then there's these issues coming up, these, I don't know, opinions or something like, and how do you then address it? And especially sometimes if it hasn't been addressed for long.
Yeah, when it's the elephant in the room, right? Like where you
can just feel like it's tearing on.
But isn't the question then? I mean, like we asked before, why are these issues rearing their head now? Why has this become such a problem today in a way that we feel it wasn't a problem yesterday?
I think if 2020 and 2021 have shown us anything, it can actually be dangerous when people can't agree on basic facts. And we're now sitting here in this room to talk about this particular issue, but to really tighten it down and make it specific, there's a lot of people out there right now who don't believe in things like vaccines. They don't believe that the coronavirus is real, and things like that have made it impossible for people to have like a dialogue where they have some, basic agreement on what's happening in the world. And yeah, they might be able to sit across on the breakfast table and have like, some normal family interactions, but there's this thing boiling in the background where they really, really fundamentally disagree on something. And then part of that disagreement is really just about like not having a worldview that can be reconciled with the worldview of a family member. And it's not to, start pointing finger and calling people crazy, but, we can see the results in different countries, Denmark, United States, once again, here we are, dialectic peoples making that comparison. We're literally out of the restrictions now. The government has just, put all that stuff and said, hey, we've reached the point where we don't need to do this anymore. That's largely because the strategy worked. Vaccines have been taken by enough people that COVID is basically under control. Yes, sure, some people will still get it. Some people will get sick, but it is not a pandemic that is so dangerous for Denmark that we have to keep restricting things in the public sphere. And the United States is not at that point. And we can see how polarized the United States is. And people are fighting about whether or not kids should have masks. They're fighting about whether or not it's a good idea to be vaccinated. They're fighting against mandates about vaccination. Like these are things. Sure, you can have a disagreement about some science, and if you are qualified to specify your opinion in a scientific language that makes sense, go for it, right? If you're qualified to do that, sure. But if you're the lay person, like most of us are, who are not scientists, don't have that expertise, it is not just about your opinion about whether or not you feel like it's the right thing to do. It's about whether or not you agree with the facts. And if you don't agree with the facts, you don't trust the facts that are being given by experts, well, then the people who do trust those facts, who do agree with the science, are at a position where it's not just about having an unpleasant dinner with somebody who has a different opinion. Their life is almost in danger because of somebody who continues to not believe the truth about a specific issue. So it becomes a life and death thing at a certain point, and there's a lot of issues where this becomes, it might not always be life or death, but it certainly becomes about quality of life and what's possible in a society when you have people who really don't agree on what's real and what's not, what's true and what's not.
I think that's a great point. I also think the problem, one of the many problems, is how when we're talking about experts, for example, certain marginalized groups in certain societies have, for example, listened to those experts, and sometimes those experts have been wrong, or sometimes they have put out information that wasn't 100% correct, that was detrimental to this group. So we've also ended up in a situation where there are certain people or certain groups in society who it isn't necessarily the message that's a problem, but it's the messenger. Mm-hmm. And if the messenger is untrustworthy, well, then it taints the message. Mm. And then you're suddenly in a situation where you have to figure out if you're going to trust this message, even though you know it's coming from someone you can't trust. And I think that's a bigger issue. That's the bigger issue that to a certain degree is at play right now, because a lot of the reactions to a lot of stuff isn't necessarily the reaction to vaccines, for example. France is a great example where they have had a couple of vaccine scandals, for example, in the 90s, where they were lied to, by the government. They were lied to by the pharmaceutical industries. So therefore now they're in a situation where it's like, okay, last time you tried to pull a fast one on us, what's the difference today? So those questions being asked can lead to skepticism and people being critical. And I think it's part of that conversation that people should be allowed to be skeptical. People should be allowed to be critical too. And it feels like we're, like you said before, it feels like we're in a situation where there's either or. You can be critical of vaccines and still see the benefits of vaccines. You can also see that vaccines in some instances have been haven't been to our advantage or have led to greater problems and issues at the same time. And it feels like we can't do that today. Today, if you have a discussion, and I think social media, and our dear politicians is a major problem. Social media has been a big problem. Social media, it's all about picking sides, creating a debate, creating a lot of engagements and a lot of data going back and forth, because that's what social media wants. And I think that way of seeing, that worldview and that way of seeing the world has trickled into, or has flooded, our everyday social and physical life.
Yeah.
I think that's an important thing, just to be critical. And us, for example, as dialectic peoples, we don't have to agree on on everything, but just, I think, and I also, the system in the last, many years have been shut down for critical voices. And right now they're shutting down also in the academic field where I am, shutting down certain research and so on. So of course, people are going to be frustrated and not trusting. And now, of course, we're taking maybe a turn on the issue with relatives, but I think it's the polarization too. And I think, and I totally agree with the social media, just online, the culture there is, we talked about it before, but either you like something or you kind of dislike something. There's not much room for, honest, deep conversation and dialogue. It's really like,
it's like
fast things. And also then it becomes life and death. But I don't think, it is very often, it's not life and death. It's more these assumptions that we have, because I also saw some rhetoric from people who are, I don't know if you either say pro-vaccine, like you say anti-vaxxer, but really the rhetoric with someone who is critical, and they might be totally wrong, but it's just the massive attack on them. Like, I hope they die of COVID, and they're just putting us all in danger. Well, that's a little bit, out of touch with what's going on. And I feel like these big narratives kind of just splits us apart sometimes. And then you wonder, the conquer and divide, is that what's going on? Are we trying to put people on
my cynicism tells me, at least points me towards a simple explanation, which is that it's easier to get attention with things that shock people or make them emotional.
Definitely.
And our attention economy thrives on exactly that. So if we sit around and have nuanced debates and have reasonable conversations, that's really difficult to sell tires and acne medicine to that crowd that's sitting there being reasonable.
Yeah.
But if you got their attention because everything is a fiery debate and everything's, yelling and screaming, yeah, you can sneak a life insurance commercial in the middle of that and get people to, oh yeah, I'm afraid of all this crazy stuff. I better go buy a new policy. But
yeah.
I think that
and if you want to sell something, by the way, you can't really, I want to sell you this car, but just know that it could also crash and it could also this, and there's a possibility that this happens. We don't have room
for that.
For all these, maybe ifs. We just want to know, does it work? How does it work? And, how do I use it?
More than that, if it's consumer products that are about your personal appearance, man, like, am I going to get more followers and more likes or not? Am I going to be more popular or not? Like, am I going to get more attention or not? And there's your influencer culture in a nutshell, right? You're following people who are famous for being famous, basically.
Yeah.
and doing what they do because everybody else is looking at them. I mean,
exactly.
So
what does that lead us to for example, the conversations? I'm now thinking also that,
but I guess,
does that also make sometimes when you sit in the family, like, do you bring that heated debate into the family? Is that sometimes
aren't the exact same?
It's that polarization does that, right?
But I think with family and colleagues and friends or whatever, I think there's also something else at play there. There's that social construct of you are part of a family. And if you
also sit face to face,
you can't just walk away from a family. You can, but it's at a cost. There's a price, emotional, physical, economical, whatever. It's at a cost. The same with your workplace, with your job. The same with your friends.
You can't just hit unfollow or block
or your team. So there's a hefty price to be paid. So therefore, once we are in these constellations, we're willing to stick around a bit for a bit longer. We're willing to work a bit harder to make it work. And that's where I think the problem actually gets bigger and gets worse, because you have to come back. You come back for Christmas, you come back for dinner, and maybe it's your mom's, maybe it's your pops. And this problem is constantly there. It's an underlying issue that's just this underwater river that's constantly just flowing. So the question is, as I see it, this polarization then gets pulled into your family, and it's much more personal there than it is on TV. If it's some politician, you switch it off. You don't want to talk about him, but you can't switch off your little brother.
Right. But the other thing too is that your views are part of your identity then.
Exactly.
So people have a really hard time not taking it personally when they don't agree.
It becomes
with their family members.
Your identity. I think that's actually dangerous today, that we put on these identities like, I am anti-racist, I am this.
The labels.
So if you meet someone who then goes against like everything, you take it very personally, first of all, but everything like cracks down. Oh, I can't be friends with this person. And almost like they took a vow, to stick to this, I was smiling before because I came to think about my father. He told me a lot of stories yesterday, but another story he told me from when he just came to Denmark and moved to Aarhus, he became a friend with a Nazi, a racist. And he was like, can you imagine? We were really good friends, but he was friends with me, but he didn't like, and he was laughing, and then just, not that they were close friends, but the point is, sometimes you meet someone who's just completely different, and you maybe in your mind you would think, I would never talk to this person, but then maybe there's something else. Maybe this person helped you out in a life and death situation, or a crucial point, and because there's also just this humanity between us, and sometimes that goes beyond the opinions. And then of course also you can actually move each other, through that.
You guys made two good points. One was with with the identity. So I guess, then you're asking questions. If this is what I am, who I am is what I believe, and you suddenly believe something else, if it's a family, friend, or whatever, then you aren't who I thought you were. That's an existential crisis you're suddenly in, right?
Because issues define sides, not just like sides of an argument, but like sides of good and evil. Like we have a comic book style sense of justice, and as much as I love Marvel movies, maybe that's become a part of the ethos of our culture right now, is that there is good and there is evil, and you are either one or the other, and there's not a lot of room in the middle. Although I would argue some of the superhero genre forces us to contend with that our heroes do things that are bad, and sometimes the villains do things that are good, right? So there's more, but I'll digress.
That's another
episode. Moment. That's another episode, as we say often.
No, but the good and evil is just a good example and an image of how it sometimes are being perceived.
We've got only a few minutes before the break, but maybe it's a good time to just grab a scenario.
Talk about some different scenarios.
I'm thinking that I'll quickly describe
you have
a
one,
scenario.
Right?
I touched on one earlier, specifically this sort of anti-vax, but I will go and broaden it out. It's not just anti-vax. It's like that in the context of the conspiracy theory worldview. That's what I call it. The conspiracy theory worldview, which believes that every major politician and every wealthy person on earth, that they're all in cahoots to destroy humanity. And things like vaccines are just part of their evil plot.
The cabal or the evil.
Right. They are the, whatever, it used to be called the Illuminati or the globalists. I think there's a lot of different names. And basically that you can't trust anything at all from mainstream media ever, because that's all controlled by rich people. So there's never any accurate information on that. And you can't trust anything that the politicians say, because they're always lying 100% of the time. And the people that you should listen to are the people who are awake and who are aware of this grand conspiracy and who are fighting against it and aren't going to let you be, taken over by these evil, wealthy, powerful, secretive, individuals who want to put chips in everybody's arms. And so, in our family, we have a extended family member. I'll describe this person that way, who is adamant that this is the true, and that the whole COVID hoax, as this person would call it, is just proof of politicians trying to take control over society and force people to get vaccinations and this whole thing. And it has caused a rift in the family, to the point where this person can't understand why nobody wants to engage in conversation anymore. Surprised that there's not much response to the social media posts that that have been fired away at a rapid pace, and not realizing that actually it seems like Facebook has probably begun to censor this individual because they've been spewing constant, totally unfounded rhetoric, totally within inside of that conspiracy worldview. And I mean, saying violent things,
So it's kind of extreme, actually.
Very extreme. Yeah, it's very extreme. So we're not just, not just healthy skepticism. Like we're going we're off the deep end, like way, way past that. And it's like, family members that feel like, well, we love this person, but it's like talking to somebody who's from another planet. Like,
and what would you?
Yeah.
We actually, was it you and me who listened to a podcast where they actually gave advice for people talking to?
Yeah. And one of the main things that, I believe he said, I'd love to, have remembered his name so that
Maybe we can put it out there.
Yeah, exactly. But was basically what he said was, don't jump into, the Shark Tank with them, because that's not going to get you anywhere. But basically what you can do is kind of ask them, how you doing? How are you doing? What's going on in your life? Empathize with them and show some interest for what they're dealing with right now, because that extremism might just be a reaction to something else that's happening in their life, which is actually really tangible, but it's something they can't handle, or it's something they can't deal with, or it's something they need help to deal with, or it's something they can't express. So the outrage and the post may just be the reaction to the problem, but the problem isn't necessarily the issues that are coming out in those posts.
Yeah.
And I think that's some great advice. It's also hard to follow.
Yeah.
Because
it's extremely difficult.
Because we all get triggered by certain things, you know?
It's really hard not to take someone's extremely vitriolic language personally. It's difficult not to react emotionally to it. And I think exactly what you're saying, that there's a deep need for empathy in that situation if you can muster it, which means that you've got to be able to sift some of the good from the bad, you know, and filter out some of that language and then focus on what's really important.
Yeah. Or at least prepare yourself when you're going to engage with this said person or peoples. Prepare yourself. And if it's something you can't do, then maybe the right thing is not to engage, and then maybe figure out how you maybe can distance yourself for a minute. 'Cause sometimes, you know, that can bring people around, or maybe, you know, you can be honest and just say, hey, I can't deal with it, but listen, there's someone here who helped me out when I was in a tough situation. If you feel like it, here's the number.
The other thing too, I think of with that is, you know, in line with trying to have some empathy with a person who you genuinely believe is totally off the rocker, like they just out in the outer space. Like, I think part of, particularly with these kinds of disagreements, the sort of conspiracy, you could also throw the sort of Trump conspiracy view into that, which I know, you know, that's extremely controversial in America. But I mean, there's this, you know, Trump supporters. That's become like a label for a group of people who have very, very extreme views. But that's also a big fat label that doesn't always describe all those people. I mean, we have to be careful with that. But to get back to the point that I wanted to make was, when people engage in these particular belief systems that are genuinely rooted in revolutionary rhetoric on like a systemic level, I wonder if it's tempting to believe those things when you don't feel like you have enough skin in the game, so to speak. Like the modern world has not really, you don't really have much stake in what's going on, because you're not able to have enough power over your own life in the system that you're in. And so to say that the system is against you, that the system is rigged, the system is invalid, that's very appealing if you believe you haven't had a fair shot. And I think that that's part of the appeal, I think, at play, specifically. I'm thinking in the American context, you know, it's one of the symptoms of inequality. People can become so hopeless and detached from the system that they constantly feel like they're failing in, that anybody who comes along and says, hey, you know what, man, the system's rigged. Not only is it rigged, it's rigged by some really evil people, and we got to get rid of them. I mean, that, you know, it may be, you know, the first part is appetizing. The second part feels a little extreme, but the more and more you get drawn into that web of, you're being lied to, you've been tricked, you've been had, you've been bamboozled. Look, here's the truth. We've got the truth. There's something that feels empowering in that scenario. We feel like you've got the knowledge, you've got the truth. And, you know, it's like, that's this little piece of a weapon you can have to fight back against the system that's beating you down.
And I think, feeling like you want to find the truth, then someone, you know,
lays it out
and say, this is the truth. Can't you see it? And I said it before that I like conspiracies. And I think for me, that's the same thing that is appealing. Like, I want to figure this out.
Sure. And who doesn't love a good mystery? Right?
Yeah, but then I found out actually in what I'm doing now, the academic research, and no, I'm not putting conspiracy theory into that, not at all, but it sort of, I can use that urge to figure things out.
Yeah, that
in
curiosity.
That field.
Yeah.
The research, like putting things together, looking at actual history and finding out, not that I, so.
Yeah, but that was
more on that.
We'll definitely have more on that. That was part
That's
one. So stick around, man. We'll be
yeah. We'll be right back.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Melvin.
Hi, I'm Scarlett
This is episode number 15.
of Dialectic People's Podcast.
This episode is all about family.
You can listen to this podcast anywhere where you listen to other podcasts. You can listen to all of our episodes on dialecticpeoples.com.
And now back to the show.
Welcome back to part 2 of the Dialectic People's Podcast, brothers and sisters. And we're still talking about how to talk to relatives you disagree with. And we had a scenario. Brandon, you talked about a family scenario and a family member who was you felt that had become very extreme in their views, and we talked about what's actually going on, but how can we engage with them? How can we engage with the whole situation? And I think it was Aya who was talking about it just before that. It's also about why are we engaging with them? What do we want to get out of these engagements? Because if you have someone that is that far down the rabbit hole, is one conversation going to change it for them? I mean, are you going to come in there and say something that is going to change their whole worldview and save them from themselves? That is just not going to happen, right? So you got to see that as part of a process and a long running process. And are you ready to engage in that? Do you have the skills, the time, the energy to do that? Right. So I think there are lots of questions we have to ask ourselves in these situations, because the whole situation in our family members or of these scenarios at the workplace and so on, they lead to, we can point the finger, and there are definitely lots of things to point the finger at. But if we do want to solve these problems, or do we want to get closer to the truth, or we want to help them out, well, then there's some questions we need to ask ourselves too. So.
Yes, definitely. A lot of, and also, thinking it over, like what do you want to say? But sometimes things also happen, when you least expect it. Something is said just in the middle of a nice conversation. It could be, we didn't talk too much, but we talked about this before. It could be some kind of racist remark. So it just takes you by surprise sometimes. Exactly. And then it's just difficult. And I think that's really where it's important to have had these conversations before, and also thought it through, like, how do I want to react? So you're never prepared, but you can also prepare yourself. And also that's where the conversations with our children is important, because you can also prepare them. What do you do in certain situations? If they are in a group of friends and someone says something very unpleasant, how do you react? And then there's different scenarios, but just that you can pull that out. But I think you're absolutely right. You're not always prepared when it happens, but you can prepare for it. And you can have these conversations with yourself. You can have these conversations with friends, family, professionals too out there who can help. And I also think sometimes you also have to ask yourself, do you want to have this conversation with that person? Do you have the time and the energy to engage in that conversation
and the emotional stability or control to be able to handle that situation and also handle the after effects of that situation, because it can be very brutal and it can be very intense.
But then there's also the fact that if it takes out on one person and it's not you, then there's also, for me, there's an extra, responsibility or your obligation.
Can you explain that? What exactly?
Yeah, for example, with racism or gender discrimination, and if, for example, someone says something condescending about me as a woman, for example, and you sit next to me, then I might be unable, and sometimes it's just this kind of shock, and it hits you, and you're,
at a loss
muted,
for words, right?
and even now. But then it's also important, I think, to step in. If you're looking from the outside, if you sit next to it and step into that conversation, and not, and I'm not saying that's easy, but that's again something you can prepare for. If you're in a situation where something hits someone else than you, then you might be a better position to take that, to challenge that view.
Certainly, if you have the capacity to not take it personally. And I think that's, there was just a couple of things that you both mentioned. One being, around kids and trying to teach them how to react to situations where somebody has a very strong opinion or maybe says something that really provokes them. And the other thing that I think of is, you could be just the ally of somebody who needs help in a moment like that. Boy, how many things that happen right now when it comes to just discriminatory language or racially charged language being used to hurt somebody, and that person's on their own with nobody sticking up for them. I think that's, and then I think if we consider those situations, around the family dinner table, maybe we're at Thanksgiving and there's that one, the classic Thanksgiving situation is like you're at the table and your racist uncle says something awful. What do you do when everybody else at the table just doesn't want there to be a conflict? Then they might kind of pick the side of the person who's the most difficult to get to shut up, just to shut the person down who's more reasonable so that there isn't a conflict. How many times does that happen?
Yeah.
Right. And
so might not be liked for speaking up, actually.
Right. You think you're saying the right thing. In your heart of hearts, you're speaking up and saying the right thing. And you get shut down by the family because they just don't want the conflict to happen. They want there to be peace before truth. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And I think that's not really peace. That's pacification.
Exactly.
And I think that's a difficult situation to be in. And, we wanted to kind of address in the second half here some of the things that you can actually do. What are solutions for that situation when you're in, right? When you're basically singled out with people you love, but there's obviously a very just absolutely critical disagreement about something really important, and that you're sitting across the table from like one person who is just dead wrong, but they're taking up all the air in the room, and everybody else is just
backing off, right?
Backing off, right? So what do you do? I think that's where you have to have the self-control that you can muster to not take it personally, but as much as you possibly can, don't acquiesce, don't give in. Because that justifies not only the point of view, but also the approach. You give power to somebody who's decided to not only say something highly charged, but in a way that is maybe provocative. And then when you let them win, especially in front of other people, it feels like, man, you let them win on more than one front, where we really need people to have, they need to take the L, actually. But that's easier said than done, and I get it. But I've seen it in my own family, my own personal experiences. The moment that you give into your emotions and you act, that you lose your credibility at the table sometimes, and don't choose necessarily the best argument. Yeah. So remaining calm, as difficult as that is, that's like step number one, right? Don't get emotional.
Oh, go ahead if you.
Yeah, and also depends on which emotions some are more useful than others. Of course, if you go on with hate and anger and out of frustration. But for me, I mean, it might sound, I don't know, tacky or superficial, but for me, love is the answer. But to use a very
I like love.
But yeah, we like love on this podcast. But communicating with love, meaning authenticity and coming, from a good place, or just at least from your heart, like like we also talk about an honest conversation. There's this book that I've read 2 times, and I don't know if I pronounce his name right, Thich Nhat Hanh, a Buddhist monk, and I believe it's called The True Art of Communication. It's a pretty new book from him. He's written tons of books. But that is, in a world of this constant noise that we get in information, all that, how we communicate authentic and with love and truth and, with others. And I think we have to take that really into considerations when we talk about, especially with loved ones.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
absolutely.
With the family situation, and I guess it goes for the workplace too, and groups of friends and so on. It can be a little bit more complicated with the workplace, because if we're talking about racism in the workplace, if the workplace doesn't openly acknowledge that racism exists and therefore also exists at their workplace, and some of their workers may be racist, then it's really, really hard to get to grips with.
You don't have the support of the leadership.
You don't have the support of the leadership of said employer. So there's some. It gets a bit more intricate and complex there. But I mean, in a family situation, so we in my family, we are political refugees, and my father is basically the Agami of Rødovre, where I come from. It's our country is an occupied territory, but it still exists. That means it's right now it's not recognized as an independent and sovereign state, but it's still an occupied territory, so it's recognized as a territory that exists, and it's a long political situation. But basically, my father is the Agami. Agami is not only the leader of the country, President King, what you may choose to call it, but you're also the spiritual leader. So it's massive. It's a lot of responsibility, and he has been running. He hasn't been home for the last 40 years, maybe 45, because he was forced to flee the African continent because they were trying to kill him, basically. And I've grown up in exile, and he has raised us in exile, basically been in exile to be able to raise us. And we are now grown, and he is still in exile. And there's a lots of trauma that comes with being in his situation. A lot, a lot. And sometimes having to talk to him is really, really hard, because you have to go through different stages of, you have to go through the politics, you have to go through the sorrow, you have to go through the rage, you have to go through the regret, you have to go through so many different emotional states before you can actually get to him, or you can actually get to what you want to say. And that sometimes has led to a situation where I've had to figure out if, okay, is what I want to say really that important? And if it is, okay, how can I get to him without getting pissed off on the way? Because that's usually what happens, and then it ends in a shouting match, or it just ends with us going, all right, we're not going to talk about this, right? And that isn't a positive outcome for anybody. So I've kind of, there are different strategies I use. One is like, okay, is it really that important? Does it have to be said now? Is he in that state of mind to accept what I'm going to say? Okay, yes, cool. Yes, no, okay. Fuck it, I'm not going to say anything. Sometimes it's also, okay, I'm just going to go head on with this, say it, and take whatever comes. And if it leads to a fight, it leads to a fight, but that fight is worth it. And then sometimes I've like with my siblings, it's been like, listen, maybe one of my siblings will talk about it, right? We'll bring it up and we'll open the issue and they'll get talking about it. And then you can kind of then like, okay, that opens the door to let me in and then talk about it. And so there's so many ways to try to get to where you want to go. But no matter what, it's never easy, right? It's never easy. And one thing I noticed with my dad was like, it's like sometimes, okay, just shut up. I mean, me personally, if I just shut up and let him say what he wants to say, bite the goddamn bullet. I'm 44, so, I've been doing that for a long time, but bite the bullet. And when he's kind of gotten everything off his chest that he needs to get off his chest, well, then I can kind of go, well, this is actually what I've been thinking. And that actually works with him, sometimes after taking places, he has to handle something practical and stuff. And we'll be in the car and he'll be talking and talking and talking and talking and talking. And then at some point he'll be like, okay. And then I'll just say, yeah, well, I've been thinking about this. And he's kind of totally open. Right. So the question there, that's maybe a different type of example because we don't necessarily disagree on our worldviews, but we have taken very different paths to get there. And sometimes it feels like those paths don't intersect.
Right.
but with a bit of patience and understanding, they actually do. But we also have the situation where there's just some things where I'm just like, fuck it, it's not worth it.
He might say it in some other way using other words, but sometimes we just have to like listen, like you said, just listen to what are they saying instead of just jumping ahead sometimes.
Right. Yeah. And I think one of the, not to hog the mic, but
no, that's
one of those strategies like we were talking about is like, if you are a family, try to use family to try to handle the situation. So if it's Christmas or birthday, I mean, you can talk to the rest of the family and be like, yo, this dude keeps saying this or she keeps saying this and it's crazy and I can't handle it. I can't be around it with my kids and wife and stuff. What are we going to do? Well, then maybe, someone can reach out to him and say, hey, we love you. We want you to come along. But this shit right here is tearing us apart. So when you show up next time, we all there for the same thing. Let's try to keep it, not that you can't speak the truth if that's what you want to do, but let's keep it cordial or keep it on a level where everyone can actually be there. And that's that same empathy we're talking about, showing them. They also have to be able to show it to the rest of us.
Yeah. Ultimately, like, what do you want more? To prove your family member wrong or to have your family member in your family? And I think, sometimes sometimes you have to make some compromises. And my wife and I were just talking today about communication as being one of these things that now, in the year 2021, communication has never been more important. I think that's an understatement of the year, but it's like it is so critically important to be good at communicating. And at the same time, there are multiple ways and multiple channels available. I mean, we live in the era of communication technology at its absolute technical height, and people have never been worse at communicating. It seems like with the abundance of attention on that particular skill and the abundance of participating in communicative activities that people are still terrible at, saying what they really mean and getting their point across in a way that other people can understand. And it's a skill that we desperately need to get better at as a culture. Certainly in the case of our family members, it would be really helpful that we were able to say things in a way that they could, that they can like really understand what we're saying. And a lot of times that means choosing the timing that makes sense, choosing the words that are most easy to receive on the other end, and making sure that that the intention of the message is just as clear as the message itself. Because I think a lot of times these arguments we have with our family members, especially about these big issues, are couched in suspicions of intentions that are not necessarily there. And I think, in the case of American politics, I think that's at the heart of the problem, that we have these bad ideas about the person that we disagree with, that they intend to do something that maybe they don't intend to do. We start to, push, impute motives to those people that they don't actually have. And that's where, those disagreements and misunderstandings become explosive.
Yeah. Maybe it's not personal.
Maybe it's not personal, or maybe it is really just a lack of understanding, or a lack of sensitivity, or just a lack of empathy in a particular area, but certainly not outright evil that makes a person say things that are racist or sexist or discriminatory in some other kind of way.
And there's also, some people, like a personality trait, or some people likes discussing things. And they like to be controversial. Sure. Like and it can be even a culture in a family. For example, now you mentioned your discussions with your father. I also sometimes participate in these discussions, and I sometimes also get into some, with him, discussions.
And he likes a heated discussion.
And he likes it, and we cannot not have these discussions.
That's part of the family, too.
It's always political, and then it's also, you can say almost whatever, it's you can talk about everything, and it's okay, and you can disagree, and you can go back and forth. And for me, it's somewhat familiar. Definitely, my father also always talks politics and what's wrong in the world and all that. But then sometimes I've also been into, when you come into this family through a friend or a girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, and you're just in this family where there's just quiet and peace and nothing is discussed. And you suddenly understand that person. I was in school with a boy who was just always so mellow and quiet, and then we visited his parents, and it was just so calm, Everything was just nice, calm, small conversations, and I don't think they ever got into an argument. I think they're families.
I love the sound of that. That's how I always imagined my family life.
Yeah, it sounds so nice. My son was born.
I love you, Alvin.
Well, for me, it's about a little bit odd, but I also really would like it sometimes. I was just.
But I'd like to, the same thing with my family. It's rowdy, and that's how we were raised, and that's how, my mother and father always encouraged discussions. There's not a single meal we've sat around or been around the table where there hasn't been something worth discussing, and sometimes it gets out of hand, but at the same time you can walk away from it. Everybody walks away from it. Nobody got hurt, and it's all love. So there's something in that too. And especially growing up in Denmark, going to my friends' houses, some of them, it was like, it was like going from
culture shock,
a festival, and then walking into a church. And I had no idea what was going on. And I'll be honest, I was really uncomfortable a lot of times because I was looking around. Why is nobody saying something? Why is there nobody here who has an opinion on something, or something they feel that much about, or something they want to share or want to discuss with somebody else? That seemed abnormal to me. And you talking about being that calm, I don't know if I necessarily always understood it as being calm and serene, because sometimes it just felt like there was something underneath that everybody had just agreed that we're
Definitely.
not going to talk about, right?
Usually there's something.
And that is not
boiling.
serenity, that's just something waiting. That's just waiting.
That's a ticking time bomb waiting to go off. I remember having, before my grandfather passed away, there were some things that the family had just sort of agreed were like, they're literally off the table. Like when we're going to sit down at dinner, these things will not be discussed, in particular, some political issues. And it wasn't because that those issues weren't important. It was because we had not yet figured out how to have a civil discussion about those things. Yeah. And actually, that's the right decision to make. If you know you're going to get into World War III every single time, Democrat, Republican comes up, then is it really necessary to bring it up every time? Or maybe can you just go, you know what? We haven't nailed the method for this just yet.
We're not
there yet. So we're just not going to go there right now. And that's setting a priority and saying, look, we got people in the family that disagree on some things. We're still family. We still love each other. My aunt's husband is a very conservative guy, and he and I have gone back and forth so many times. We love each other, and we always make sure to hug each other and say we love each other every time we see each other. If I were to sit him down in this podcast room right now, we could talk for 6 hours and not agree on a single thing, and then go out and I would show him around town and we'd have a beer and have a great time.
Yeah,
that's what you have to be able to do with people. You have to love them.
That's the example, because you sometimes you have, and you also have friends. Can you open?
Yeah, seems like we got interrupted.
We might have a little situation outside.
I'll just go out and handle it.
Okay, but I'll continue.
Yeah.
So sometimes you have relationships or friends or close family members that you might not agree with, but you still get along and you're still friends and you still love that person. Even your partner in life. You're not always agree on things, but you make it work anyway. But my point also being that we have these different cultures that we were brought up in. That's a part of the empathy you need to bring into a conversation. For example, also, if someone was brought up with very strong, for example, discriminative opinions, assumptions, of course you're going to be affected of that. So also, before you just jump ahead and saying this person is a bad person, then maybe also try to understand, where is that person coming from? What plays into this? How was this person brought up? Because it's easier to have a, dialogue and a nice conversation if you actually feel empathy and you have the ability to see it from someone else's perspective.
Sure. And I think, and at the same time, that capacity to be open to other perspectives, that comes from learning about the world and learning about how other people think, and maybe understanding how some of the larger conflicts in history happened because people could not find a common ground. I think we use the word context a lot on this show, and I think that's because it seems that one of the things that we see over and over again is people taking words or events or situations and taking them out of context and then spinning those things into terrible misunderstandings, if not outright lies and deceptions that really have damaging effects on society. And having a broader knowledge of where certain ideas come from, what situations have resulted from particular practices, and that goes for everything from political policies to, historical periods where things like slavery were normal. If you're able to put those things into context, then you're able to have a more meaningful dialogue with somebody who maybe might not necessarily agree with your point of view, or in a more extreme case, maybe they just are totally bent on one particular perspective. And if you've got more knowledge
and context is everything.
Then you can have a much more meaningful discussion, and maybe
and
even
a qualified also sometimes discussion. Not that you have to know everything about everything, but just think about it before you go into a subject. Is that something like we talked about in the beginning? Am I an expert on this? Do I know what I'm talking about? Maybe you should just be a little bit humble towards what do I know? Do I know everything? No, I do not. I think sometimes people nowadays lack a little bit of humility. Is it humility?
Humility, absolutely.
Yeah, because, and I also thought I know we're not talking about the online communications, but fact is sometimes you communicate online with your family and friends, especially if you live far away from each other. And it's not always, when you meet people in person, you usually start with, how are you doing? How are you feeling? And you're catching up. But sometimes online is just going straight into something. And you kind of need to touch base with that other person because, as you said with your father, is he okay? Did you sleep well at night? Well, if someone said, I only slept 1 hour and I've been sick the last week, then maybe you should wait, with diving in.
Let sleeping dogs lie.
Yeah.
Just checking in on each other.
Yeah, but a little empathy goes a long way in that case, and I think if there's any advice I would want to give on this topic, it would be that if you can find some empathy in your heart for somebody you disagree with, it might save your relationship with that person, and then it opens up some possibilities to figure out how to disagree productively, right? Because that's what we can't forget. We have the right to disagree. We don't always have to agree with somebody. But can you do it in a way where maybe you both learn something from it, or at the very least, you don't lose anything from it? Right? That's where I'm at on that. It's just preserve a good relationship, preserve the things that are important. Love for your family. That's way more important than being right about something. So.
Definitely, I'll back that up any day.
Yeah, and respect.
Always respect. Yeah.
Respect just for each other as human beings, basically.
We're in a period of time where that's being forgotten a little too often.
Yeah,
man. This was it was great to be back. It was great to have this conversation. I hope it shed some light, and maybe there was some advice you could use, or maybe just spark some ideas or some thoughts you could take with you out there. But we will definitely be back with more episodes. Dialectic People's Podcast is back and alive and kicking, and we'll be looking forward to seeing you guys.
We're finally starting to put out some video material, right? So
exactly.
It's time to...
We'll be looking forward to seeing you guys again. So on that note, man, take care of yourselves, and one love.
Yeah. Thank you for tuning in.
Yes, thank you very much. We'll see you.
Peace.
This has been episode number 15 of the Dialectic People's Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. What do you want to say, son?
Actually, I want to go home.
Yeah, I want to go home too. All right, let's go home.
I don't mean right now.
Okay.